Jimmy Fallon stunned when Cate Blanchett suddenly walks into audience after spotting this woman that night on the Tonight Show stage. Cate Blanchett stopped mid-laugh. Not at the end of a story. Not after a breath. Mid-laugh. Her own laugh. The one that had been filling the studio for the past 20 minutes. And then it simply stopped the way a light stops when someone cuts the power. Completely, instantly, without warning. Her eyes moved to the fourth row of the audience, and something in her face changed in a way that had nothing to do with performing. Jimmy Fallon followed her gaze. He saw a woman in a gray cardigan sitting very still. He looked back at Cate. Cate was already standing. The 300 people in that studio went silent before they fully understood why. It was a Thursday evening in November 2024. The Tonight Show segment producer later said she had worked in live television for 17 years and had seen guests cry, freeze, walk off, and once famously fall asleep. But she had never seen a guest stand up from the interview chair, step around the desk, and walk directly into the audience without a word to the host. Not like that. The control room still talks about what happened next. Cate Blanchett had come in the way she always comes into rooms, with a quality that is difficult to name precisely. Something between stillness and electricity, as if the space rearranges itself slightly around her. She was wearing a deep green jacket, and she had been talking about her new film with the ease of someone who had long since stopped being nervous about anything. The audience had come from Pennsylvania, from Connecticut, from as far as Ohio. They had waited since 10 in the morning. They were there for exactly this. Cate Blanchett at full wattage, funny and precise, and completely in command of every word. The interview had been going beautifully. Jimmy was sharp. Cate was sharper. Everything was right. Everything was flowing. Then Cate Blanchett looked at the fourth row and went perfectly still. Not loud, not staged, just a woman sitting in a seat, an ordinary woman, older, in a gray cardigan and sensible shoes, the kind of woman who does not draw attention to herself and has spent a lifetime not drawing attention to herself. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching the stage with an expression that was trying very hard to stay composed. She was not succeeding entirely. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes go bright when a person is working hard to hold something in. Cate Blanchett stood up. Jimmy noticed it in her hands first. They had been loose, relaxed, resting lightly on the armrests the way experienced television guests learn to hold themselves. But now both hands gripped the armrests. And then she released them. And then she was standing, and she said nothing at all to Jimmy. Nothing to the audience, nothing to the cameras. She simply stepped around the desk with the focused, unhurried movement of someone crossing a room toward something that has been waiting a very long time. The entire studio froze. The band did not stop because anyone signaled them. They stopped because the room changed. Questlove set his sticks down on the snare with great care and stood up from his drum kit. The director did not cut to commercial. The cameraman closest to the stage stayed exactly where he was. A woman in the seventh row put her hand over her mouth, and then the whole room held itself in a silence that had weight and texture. Cate stepped off the stage and walked into the house. She reached the fourth row. She stood in the aisle beside the woman in the gray cardigan. She looked at her for a moment without speaking. The way you look at someone when you are making absolutely certain you are seeing what you think you are seeing. Then Cate Blanchett knelt down beside the seat. "Margaret," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was caught perfectly by her microphone. 300 people held their breath. Jimmy Fallon did not move. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1971. Cate Blanchett wasn't always Cate Blanchett. Icon and legend. In the spring of 1971, a woman named Margaret Ellery was 26 years old and teaching drama at a small secondary school in the inner suburbs of Melbourne, Australia. She had studied theatre at university on a partial scholarship and had wanted once to act professionally. Her professors had told her she was good enough. But somewhere between the wanting and the doing, the practical world had intervened, the way it tends to for people without safety nets. And she had taken the teaching position because it was steady. She did not stop loving theater. She brought it into every classroom she ever stood in. In 1971, Margaret Ellery ran the drama program at Clifton Road Secondary College with almost no budget, no proper stage, and a portable lighting rig she had repaired herself with electrical tape and persistence. What she had instead of equipment was an absolute conviction that the young people in her classroom deserved to feel what it was like to live inside a story. In the autumn of 1971, March in Melbourne, the beginning of the school year, a girl named Patricia Horton walked into Margaret's drama class. 14 years old, shy in the way perceptive children are shy, as if they are receiving too much information from the room at all times and have learned to stay still. She sat in the back. She did not volunteer for anything in the first 3 weeks. In the 4th week, Margaret asked the class to stand up and say the name of something they were afraid of as themselves, without character, without pretense. Just their own voice saying a true thing. Patricia Horton stood up and said, "Being ordinary." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. After class, she asked Patricia to stay. "That took more courage than anything I've seen in this room in 10 years, Margaret told her. "Do you know that?" Patricia looked at her shoes. "I want you to audition for the winter production," Margaret said. "Not because I think you'll get the lead, because I think the room will do something to you. And I think you need to let it." Patricia Horton auditioned. She got the lead. She was extraordinary. Margaret Ellery cast her in every production for the next 4 years. She drove Patricia to regional youth theater competitions in her own car, at her own expense. She wrote Patricia's application letter to the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney. 3 drafts, every word chosen carefully. A letter that argued for Patricia's talent with the authority of someone who has seen many students and knows when one of them is different. Patricia Horton was accepted to NIDA at 19. She moved to Sydney and wrote to Margaret from the first week. A long, slightly chaotic letter about the city and the other students, and the terrifying precision of the training. Margaret wrote back. She always wrote back. Long, careful letters about craft and patience, and the discipline of not performing when you could simply be. Patricia graduated in 1982. She spent the next decade in Australian theatre, then film, then television. She met a man, married him, had 2 children in a house in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. She sent Margaret a card at Christmas every year and a longer letter on Margaret's birthday. Then Patricia Horton died of a sudden cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in April 2019. She was 52 years old. Her children were teenagers. She had told her daughter Emma about Margaret Ellery more than once. She had said, "If anything ever happens to me, find her. I want her to know." Emma Horton was 23 years old when her mother died. It took her 4 years to find the words, and then another 6 months to find Margaret, who had retired from teaching in 2002 and was living quietly in a suburb of Melbourne. Margaret was 78 years old and had been diagnosed with early-stage heart failure the previous winter. Her doctor spoke to her in the careful language doctors use when they are telling someone to begin thinking about time. Emma wrote to her. She explained who her mother was and enclosed a photograph, Patricia Horton at 16, and costume from a school production. Caught mid-scene with her face completely open and alive, the stage lights making her look as if she were made of something brighter than ordinary material. Margaret looked at it for a long time. She wrote back within a week. The letter was 4 pages. Emma Horton made a phone call to a management company she found after 2 weeks of careful searching. She explained everything. She said, "My mother's teacher is dying, and she spent her whole life giving something away and never knowing what it became. I want her to see." The response came in less than 24 hours. The arrangements were made in absolute secrecy. The Tonight Show staff was told only that a specific guest would be in the audience, a woman connected to someone important in Cate's life. Emma was seated beside Margaret in the 4th row, center, her mother's photograph in her bag. Behind the scenes, Cate had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. She had asked that Margaret not be told which guest was being interviewed that evening. She had asked that the stage lights be brought up slightly on the audience for the first segment. Not enough to be noticeable, just enough that from the stage, if you were looking, you could see faces. She wanted to be the one to find her. She wanted Margaret to feel like a person, not a moment. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Cate had recognized her from the 3rd question of the interview. 22 years had passed since they had last been in the same room. Margaret's hair had gone from dark to white. But the way she sat, hands folded, perfectly still, watching the stage with that quality of focused attention that some teachers carry their entire lives, was exactly as Cate remembered it. She had spent the next 18 minutes of the interview holding it together. Now she was kneeling in the aisle of the 4th row, and Margaret Ellery was looking at her with an expression that had no performance in it at all, just an old woman, and a moment she had not known to expect, arriving all at once. Jimmy had come to the edge of the stage. He looked at the audience. He said, "Very quietly, folks, I think we need to let this happen." And then he said nothing else. Cate reached into the inside pocket of her green jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, handwritten, the ink slightly faded, dated March 1993. She held it out to Margaret with both hands. Margaret looked at the letter. Her hands rose slowly from her lap. "You kept it," Margaret said. 30 years. Cate's voice broke clean across the middle of the word. "I have read it before every single opening night I have ever had. Every one." Margaret's hands were trembling. Emma, beside her, put an arm around her shoulders. "I was just a drama teacher," Margaret said. "In a school nobody's heard of, with electrical tape holding the lights together. You told me," Cate said, "that the room would do something to me if I let it." She pressed the letter gently into Margaret's hands. "You were right. You were completely right, and I have never told you that." "Why didn't you?" Margaret stopped. She looked at her. "How did you even?" Emma found me. Cate glanced up at the young woman beside her. "She wrote and told me you were sick. She told me what you meant to her mother." She paused. "I had to come find you before you stopped being findable." Margaret looked at the letter in her hands. She looked at Cate. She looked at the 300 people in the studio, all of them on their feet now, all of them completely still. "I always wondered," Margaret said, "if any of it mattered. You worked 30 years, and you never really know." "It mattered," Cate said. "It mattered for every single person in every single seat you ever put someone in. It mattered more than you know how to measure." A sound came from Margaret Ellery that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry. Something in between. Something that comes out of a person when they have been carrying a question for a very long time and the answer finally arrives. Emma reached into her bag and placed the photograph on Margaret's knee. Patricia Horton at 16, lit from above, completely alive. Margaret put her hand over it. The standing ovation began in the second row and moved outward like a wave through every seat in the house. 300 people on their feet before any single person made a decision. The sound building until the walls of the studio seemed to hold it like a vessel. The cameraman closest to the stage did not cut away. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Margaret Ellery passed away 14 weeks later, on a Monday morning in February in Melbourne. Emma Horton flew to Australia for the service. Around her in the small church sat former students, dozens of them, people in their 40s and 50s and 60s who had driven and flown from across the country. People who had been placed on a stage in a school nobody had heard of by a woman with electrical tape and a conviction that they deserved to feel alive. The letter is framed now. In Emma's home, Cate wrote back immediately, "Keep it, please, it belongs with her story." Some teachers give you a line to read. Margaret Ellery gave people the room. And some rooms, once you have stood inside them, you carry for the rest of your life.